The town of Maplewood looked exactly as Daniel Whitmore remembered it, frozen in time like a snow globe that nobody had bothered to shake in 20 years. The maple trees lining Main Street still arched overhead, their branches creating a natural cathedral that filtered the autumn sunlight into golden streams. The old hardware store still occupied the corner lot, its faded blue awning flapping gently in the October breeze. Even the coffee shop where he had spent countless teenage afternoons appeared untouched. Though the name had changed from the Copper Kettle to Brew Haven, Daniel parked his Tesla in front of the town library, a modest brick building with white columns that had always seemed grand to his younger self. Now, having built conference centers and office complexes across 3 continents, he recognized it for what it was, a simple, dignified structure that served its purpose with quiet grace, much like the woman he had come to see 20 years. 2 decades since he had left this place with nothing but a scholarship to MIT and dreams too big for a town of 5,000 people. He had built an empire in software development, sold his first company for $30 million, started another that went public and made him genuinely wealthy. He had dated models and executives, owned penthouses in Seattle and Manhattan, and yet here he was, pulling open the heavy wooden door of the Maplewood Public Library with hands that trembled slightly. The smell hit him first. Old books and lemon polish, the same combination that had defined his adolescence. He had spent hundreds of hours here, ostensibly studying but really just finding excuses to be near Grace Holloway. The girl with chestnut hair and eyes like warm honey who had volunteered at the circulation desk. Every day after school she was there now, behind that same desk, and the sight of her made Daniel forget every smooth business pitch and practiced introduction he had ever mastered. Grace had aged the way fine things age, becoming more herself rather than less. Her hair, still long, now held threads of silver that caught the light. Fine lines framed her eyes, but they only made her more beautiful. Evidence of years spent smiling and reading in the sunlight, she looked up from her computer screen and her eyes widened. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Grace stood slowly, her hand going to her throat in a gesture he remembered from their youth, something she did when surprised or nervous. "Daniel Whitmore," she said softly. Her voice had deepened slightly, gained richness. "I heard you might be back in town, Grace." He crossed the space between them, aware of an elderly patron watching with undisguised curiosity from the romance section. "You look wonderful." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "You look successful." He glanced down at his casual attire, jeans and a button-down that probably cost more than most people spent on a week of groceries. "I look uncomfortable in a small town, you mean?" That earned him a smile, the real one he remembered, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Maybe a little, "What brings you back to Maplewood?" "My mother. She had a stroke last month. She's recovering, but I'm staying at the house for a while to help her through physical therapy." Grace's expression shifted to immediate concern. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How is Patricia doing?" They talked for 20 minutes. Daniel leaning against the circulation desk while Grace fielded the occasional patron, needing to check out books or ask questions. The conversation flowed easily, sliding from his mother's health to town gossip to the changes and constants in Maplewood. But beneath the surface chat, Daniel found himself studying Grace, looking for clues to the question that had formed the moment he saw her left hand. "Bear of any rings?" Finally, during a lull, he asked, "You never married?" Grace's hand stilled on the keyboard. "No, I never did. But surely you had offers. You were the most beautiful girl in 3 counties. Were." She raised an eyebrow, and he laughed. "Are, definitely are," softened his voice. "Why, Grace? Why are you still here, still alone?" She met his gaze steadily. "Who says I'm alone? I have my sister's family, my friends, this library, a whole community. My life is full, Daniel. You know what I mean?" Grace sighed and closed her laptop. "My break is in 10 minutes. There's a new cafe 2 blocks over. Will you buy me coffee and let me explain without judgment?" "No judgment. I promise." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a modern coffee shop that seemed oddly out of place in historic Maplewood. Grace wrapped both hands around a ceramic mug of chamomile tea, organizing her thoughts while Daniel waited, learning the patience that had made him successful in business negotiations. "Do you remember what we talked about the night before you left for college?" Grace finally asked. Daniel thought back to that August evening. The two of them lying on a blanket in Foster's Field, counting stars and sharing dreams. We talked about a lot of things. You said you were going to change the world, that you would build something that mattered, something that helped people connect and create. You were so passionate, so certain. Grace's smile was wistful, and I said I wanted to do the same thing, just differently. I wanted to create a space where people could discover themselves through stories, where knowledge was free and accessible to everyone. You've done that? This library. Yes. And I said something else that night, something you'd probably forgot. She looked at him directly. I said I wouldn't settle. Not for the wrong person, not for half a life, not for anything less than the kind of love that transforms you. Daniel's heart began to beat faster. I remember now. We made a promise. We promised that no matter where life took us, we wouldn't compromise on what mattered most. You kept that promise in your way. I kept it in mine. But Grace, are you telling me that in 20 years you never met anyone who made you feel that way? She took a sip of tea and he noticed her hand trembled slightly. I met someone. Several someones, actually. Good men. Robert Callahan, the doctor, courted me for 2 years. He would have married me, given me children, a comfortable life, and I cared for him deeply. But I didn't love him the way I knew I could love someone. The way I had loved someone. She set down her mug. I'm not a fool, Daniel. I knew the chances of you coming back, of us picking up where we left off, were essentially zero. This isn't a fairy tale. But I also knew that settling would be a betrayal of myself, of that girl who lay under the stars and promised to hold out for something real. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, a door he had sealed shut years ago. Are you saying you've been waiting for me? No. Grace's answer was firm. I've been living my life, building something meaningful, becoming the person I wanted to be. But I wasn't willing to give my body, my heart, my future to someone just because it was expected or convenient. One chose myself, Daniel. Every day, I chose myself and my integrity over the comfortable lie. The revelation hung between them, profound and unsettling. Daniel had assumed that everyone moved on, that Grace would have married some local guy, had children, built a normal life. The idea that she had remained not just single but untouched, dedicated to some ideal of love they had discussed as naive teenagers, was staggering. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Grace considered the question seriously. Sometimes I regret the children I don't have. I would have been a good mother. And there are lonely nights moments when I wonder if I was too rigid, too romantic. But no, overall, I don't regret knowing myself well enough to wait for something genuine rather than accepting something adequate. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cool from holding the mug, slender and strong. I came back to check on my mother. I planned to stay 6 weeks, get her settled, then return to Seattle. But now I'm sitting here wondering if maybe the universe has terrible timing or perfect timing. Grace squeezed his hand but pulled hers back gently. Don't make this complicated, Daniel. You have a life. I have mine. We're not teenagers anymore, and we can't pretend that one conversation over coffee erases 20 years of separate paths. I know that. But Grace, I've spent 2 decades building things, making money, achieving goals. And I've never felt as alive as I did the summers we spent together. Doesn't that mean something? It means we were young, and everything felt intense. It means first love leaves an imprint. She gathered her things, preparing to return to work. But it doesn't mean we can or should try to recapture something that existed in a different time, for different people. Daniel stood as she did. Can I see you again? Not to recapture anything, but to discover who we are now. Grace paused, and he saw the war in her expression, caution fighting hope. Finally, she nodded. Friday evening. Come to dinner at my house. 7 o'clock. I live in the old Preston cottage on Willow Lane. I'll be there. As Daniel walked back to his car, the autumn air sharp in his lungs, he felt more uncertain than he had in years. In business, he knew how to identify opportunities, calculate risks, execute plans. But this was his childhood love, still unattached at 37. Admitting she had held herself apart from romance for reasons that somehow included him, at least philosophically. And the most shocking part, the detail that kept replaying in his mind, was her admission of complete inexperience. In this modern age, that level of commitment to an ideal was almost unthinkable. It spoke of either remarkable conviction or heartbreaking stubbornness, possibly both. He spent the drive to his mother's house trying to understand his own feelings. Was he intrigued by the novelty, by Grace's uniqueness? Or was this something deeper, the recognition of a connection he had buried under years of surface relationships and busy ambition? His mother was napping when he arrived home. Daniel sat on the porch of his childhood house, watching the sun set over the familiar landscape, realized that for the first time in 20 years, he had no idea what he was supposed to do next. The revelation was terrifying and strangely exhilarating, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. Deciding whether to jump, Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Maplewood look like a postcard. Daniel drove slowly down Willow Lane, taking in the modest homes with their neat gardens and front porches. The Preston cottage sat at the end of the street, a small Victorian with pale yellow siding and white trim. Flower boxes still held late-season chrysanthemums. The porch swing moved gently in the breeze. Grace answered the door wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the gold in her eyes. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked nervous and beautiful, and Daniel felt 17 again, picking her up for their first real date. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I hope you're hungry." I may have overcooked. The interior of the cottage was exactly what Daniel expected. Built-in bookshelves covering every available wall. Comfortable furniture that invited reading, soft lighting, and the smell of something delicious coming from the kitchen. It was a sanctuary, he realized. A space Grace had created that reflected exactly who she was. They had barely settled in the living room with glasses of wine when the doorbell rang. Grace's expression shifted to surprise and then resignation. "That will be my sister." I should have known she wouldn't be able to resist. Beth Holloway burst in with the energy of someone who had never learned to enter a room quietly. She was shorter than Grace, rounder, with the same chestnut hair, cut in a practical bob. Behind her trailed two children, a girl of about 10 and a boy of 7, and a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples. "Daniel Whitmore," Beth exclaimed, pulling him into a hug before he could react. "Look at you all fancy and successful. Grace said you were back in town, and I told Michael we had to stop by and say hello. We were just in the neighborhood. We live for streets over," the tall man said with a long-suffering smile, extending his hand. "Michael Chen. Sorry about the ambush." Beth has the subtlety of a freight train. "I do not." Beth protested, but she was laughing. "I have curiosity and initiative." "Grace, you didn't tell me you were having Daniel over for dinner?" "That's very interesting." Grace had turned slightly pink. "It's just dinner, Beth." "Emhem. Just dinner with your first love who happens to be a millionaire and single and staying in town for who knows how long?" Beth turned to Daniel. "She talks about you, you know. Not often, but over the years, your name comes up." "Beth." Grace's voice held a warning, but Daniel was fascinated. "What does she say?" Beth opened her mouth, but Michael placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Kids, say hello to Mr. Whitmore, then we're going. Your aunt is trying to have a nice evening." The children dutifully shook Daniel's hand, clearly having been coached on manners. The girl, Jenny, studied him with open curiosity. "Are you the one who sent Aunt Grace flowers every year on her birthday?" Silence fell over the room. Daniel looked at Grace in confusion. "I never sent flowers." Grace had gone very still. "They stopped coming 5 years ago. There was never a card, just white roses. 25 of them every year." Beth's expression shifted from teasing to concerned. "Grace, we all assumed they were from Daniel." "Or from Robert Callahan," Michael added quietly. "He still asks about you, Grace." Daniel felt something uncomfortable twist in his stomach. Robert Callahan, the doctor who had courted Grace for 2 years. Is he still in town? "He has a practice here," Michael said. "Good man. Never married either, interestingly enough." The evening had taken an awkward turn. Beth, sensing the tension, herded her family toward the door. "We'll leave you two to your dinner." "Daniel, it was good to see you." "Grace, call me tomorrow. We need to talk." After they left, Grace stood in the middle of her living room, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry about that." Beth means well, but she has no boundaries. Don't apologize. I like her. Daniel moved closer. Grace, who sent you those flowers? I don't know. I always hoped maybe it was you. A way of saying you remembered, even if you had moved on. She laughed without humor. Pathetic, right? Building romance from anonymous flowers. It's not pathetic. Hopeful. He guided her toward the couch. Tell me about Robert Callahan. Grace sank into the cushions, pulling a throw pillow onto her lap. Robert came to Maplewood about 12 years ago, fresh out of his residency, idealistic about rural medicine. He started coming to the library regularly, and we became friends. He made his intentions clear fairly quickly. He wanted to court me properly, old-fashioned style. And you let him? For 2 years, yes. We had dinner twice a week. He took me to concerts in Portland, hiking in the mountains, weekend trips to Boston. He was patient and kind, and everything a woman should want. Grace's voice grew softer. He proposed on my 30th birthday. Took me to the lighthouse at Cape Elizabeth, had a ring that belonged to his grandmother, gave a speech about building a life together. Daniel found he was holding his breath. What did you say? I said no. I told him I cared for him deeply, but I wasn't in love with him, and it wouldn't be fair to either of us to marry without that foundation. She looked up at Daniel, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He asked me if I was waiting for someone else. I told him I was waiting for a feeling, not a person. But that was only partially true. Grace, let me finish. I need to say this. She took a deep breath. After you left, I threw myself into school, into building a life here. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, and every relationship ended the same way. Nice guy, good compatibility, but no spark. No passion. No sense of rightness. I kept thinking I was being too picky, too romantic. Everyone told me I was, but you weren't. I don't know what I was. All I knew was that settling felt like dying a little, like betraying something essential in myself. Ashi. And yes, you were part of that. The memory of how you made me feel, even as a teenager, the conversations we had about life and meaning and not accepting mediocrity. You showed me what connection could feel like, and I couldn't unknow that. Daniel moved closer, taking her hand. I didn't stay faithful to your memory, Grace. I need you to know that. I dated, I had relationships. Some lasted years. I almost got engaged once to a woman named Sophia. She was brilliant and beautiful, and we made sense on paper. What happened? I was working late one night, and she called to say she was tired of competing with my work. She said I was never fully present, that part of me was always somewhere else. And she was right. I broke it off because it wasn't fair to her. Paused. It took me another year to realize where that part of me was. It was here, in this town, with memories of a girl who believed I could be extraordinary. Grace pulled her hand away gently. Daniel, we can't build a relationship on nostalgia and idealized memories. We're not those teenagers anymore. But what if we could build something on who we are now? Two people who chose their paths, who didn't settle, who built meaningful lives? He shifted to face her fully. I'm not asking you to run away with me or make any grand gestures. I'm asking if we can explore this honestly and carefully. Before Grace could answer, her doorbell rang again. She closed her eyes briefly in frustration. I'm going to kill Beth, but it wasn't Beth. Robert Callahan stood on the porch, still in his doctor's coat with a stethoscope around his neck. He was handsome in a clean-cut way, with dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His expression shifted from hopeful to guarded when he saw Daniel through the doorway. Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was driving home from the hospital and saw your lights on. I wanted to stop by, and he faltered. This is obviously a bad time. Grace had moved to the door. Robert, this is Daniel Whitmore. Daniel, Dr. Robert Callahan. The two men shook hands with the wariness of rivals sizing each other up. Robert's grip was firm but brief. The famous Daniel? I've heard a lot about you over the years. Nothing too damaging, I hope, Daniel said lightly. All praise. Robert's tone was neutral, but his eyes held a challenge. Grace, I actually came by to tell you something. The flowers, the white roses you received for all those years, that was me. Grace's hand went to her throat. But why didn't you sign them? Because I knew what they meant to you, who you thought they were from. And I thought, if you believed Daniel was sending them, Maybe you'd finally realize he had moved on, and you could too. Robert's expression was pained. It was manipulative and wrong. I've felt guilty about it for years, especially after I stopped sending them when I left town for a while. I came back last month, and Beth mentioned you'd been asking about them. I owed you the truth. Grace looked stunned. Robert, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He glanced at Daniel. I hope you appreciate what an extraordinary woman you've found again. She's the best person I've ever known, and she deserves someone who will put her first. After Robert left, Grace sank onto her porch swing, looking dazed. Daniel sat beside her, setting them into gentle motion. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. All those years, Grace finally said, I thought you were thinking of me, remembering. And it was someone else, trying to manipulate me into forgetting you. He loved you. Loves you probably still. That doesn't make it right. She turned to him. Daniel, I need to be honest with you about something. About why I really never, as you put it, married or gave myself to anyone. You don't have to explain yes, I do. Because it's more complicated than just waiting for the right feeling or person. She took a shaky breath. When I was 22, a year after you left, something happened. There was a man, someone I trusted, a professor at the community college where I was taking classes. He misread my friendship as interest. One night after a study session, he tried to force himself on me. Daniel felt rage surge through him. Grace, I got away. I fought him off, and I ran. But it terrified me, Daniel. It broke something in me regarding trust and intimacy. I couldn't imagine being vulnerable with someone unless I felt completely safe, unless I knew without doubt that they saw me as a whole person, not an object or a conquest. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now. So yes, I held on to ideals about love and connection. But I also held on to fear. And I've spent 20 years trying to understand which is conviction and which is just self-protection. Daniel pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. Did you report him? Yes. Nothing came of it. His word against mine, no witnesses, no physical evidence, because I got away. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. I went to therapy for years. I worked through most of it. But it's still there. That hesitation, that need to be absolutely certain before I let someone in. Thank you for telling me. Daniel cupped her face gently. Grace, I don't have expectations. I don't need anything from you except honesty. Whatever pace you need, whatever boundaries you have, I respect them completely. Ah! She searched his face. Why are you really here, Daniel? What do you want from this? The truth? I don't entirely know. I came back for my mother. But seeing you again, talking to you, I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life and just woke up. Everything I've built suddenly seems empty compared to one real conversation with you. That's terrifying. It is, he agreed. But maybe the terrifying things are the ones worth pursuing. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, and they swung gently in the darkness, two people trying to bridge 20 years and countless scars. Holding on to hope despite every rational reason not to, 2 weeks passed. Daniel fell into a routine that surprised him with its simple pleasures. Mornings were spent with his mother, helping her through physical therapy exercises and managing her recovery. Afternoons, he worked remotely, handling business calls and video conferences from his childhood bedroom. Evenings belonged to Grace. They took walks through Maplewood, rediscovering the town together. They had long dinners at her cottage or his mother's house. They talked about everything: books, philosophy, their vastly different career paths, the choices that had shaped them. They were careful with each other, gentle, building trust brick by brick. Thomas Calloway, Daniel's business partner and closest friend, called on a Tuesday morning with growing concern in his voice. You've been gone 3 weeks? The board is getting nervous. When are you coming back? Daniel stood on his mother's porch, watching autumn leaves spiral down from the maples. I'm not sure, Thomas. What do you mean you're not sure? We have the Singapore deal closing next month. The investors' dinner. The product launch. Can handle those things. You're as much the face of this company as I am. Thomas was silent for a moment. Danny, what's going on? This isn't like you. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I've been someone it's not like me to be. Daniel sat on the porch steps. I've spent 20 years building things, and I'm not sure any of it matters. Not really. Not in the way that counts. You're having a midlife crisis in your childhood home? That's very cliché. Daniel laughed. There's a woman. Ah, there it is. Tell me about her. So Daniel did. He told Thomas about Grace, about their shared history, about her choices and his growing realization that success and achievement had left him fundamentally hollow. Thomas listened without interruption, which was unlike him, and signaled how seriously he was taking this. So let me understand, Thomas finally said. You've reconnected with your high school sweetheart, who has, by choice, remained completely inexperienced with men for 20 years because she refused to settle for anything less than genuine love. And now you're questioning your entire life because being with her makes. You feel alive in a way running a multi-million-dollar company doesn't. When you say it like that, it sounds insane. It sounds human. Danny, you've been my best friend for 15 years. I've watched you date gorgeous women and feel nothing. I've seen you close billion-dollar deals and barely smile. If this Grace person makes you feel something real, don't be an idiot. Don't let her go because you're afraid to change your life. After hanging up, Daniel walked to the library. Grace was shelving books in the history section, reaching up to slide a thick volume into place. She smiled when she saw him, that real smile that still made his heart skip. Slow day, he asked. For a Tuesday, fairly normal. Mrs. Patterson came in looking for romance, novels that aren't too spicy. Mr. Hughes needed help with the genealogy database. And a teenager asked where to find books about existentialism, which I'm choosing to see as a positive sign for the next generation. Can you take a break? I want to show you something. 20 minutes later, they stood in Foster's Field, the same meadow where they had lain under the stars 2 decades ago. The grass was brown now with autumn, but the view was unchanged, rolling hills, distant mountains, sky stretching endlessly above. I used to come here when I visited home, Daniel said. Not often, but sometimes. And I'd remember that night before I left. The promises we made. Grace turned to him, wind catching her hair. Why did you bring me here today? Because I need to be honest with you, and this place feels right for truth. He took her hands. Thomas called. My company needs me back in Seattle. I have obligations, meetings. I can't reschedule indefinitely. I need to return, at least for a while. He felt Grace start to withdraw, but he held her hands firmly. But here's the thing. I don't want to leave you. I don't want to return to a life that feels empty now that I remember what connection feels like. So I need to know, Grace. Is this real? Do you feel what I feel? Or am I projecting onto you, trying to recapture something that only existed because we were young? Grace's eyes searched his. I'm terrified, Daniel. Terrified of trusting this, of being wrong, of getting hurt. But yes, this is real. I feel it every time we talk. Every time you look at me like I matter more than anything else in the world. You make me want to be brave enough to risk everything, then come with me. Not forever. Not as some grand commitment. Just come to Seattle for a week. See my life, meet my friends, let me show you my world. And I'll come back here, learn your world, figure out what a life together might look like. Daniel, I can't just leave. The library has existed for 80 years. It'll survive you taking some vacation time. He pulled her closer. I'm not asking you to abandon your life. I'm asking you to expand it. To consider possibilities. Before Grace could answer, his phone buzzed. His mother's caretaker, Patricia, had fallen during her exercises and needed to go to the hospital for x-rays. The moment shattered, replaced by immediate practical concerns. Grace went with him, her hand in his as they rushed to meet the ambulance, at the hospital while they waited for news. Grace sat beside Daniel in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, her presence a quiet comfort. Helen Pritchard, the elderly former head librarian, spotted them from across the waiting room, where she was visiting her own sister. She made her way over slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. Grace, dear. And Daniel Whitmore, all grown up. Helen's eyes were sharp despite her 80-some years. I heard you were back in town, causing quite a stir. Hello, Mrs. Pritchard, Daniel said, standing to help her sit. I'm not trying to cause anything. Nonsense. You've been causing a stir since you left. The boy who escaped Maplewood and made something of himself. You're a legend around here. Helen patted Grace's hand. And this one, she's been holding vigil for you like a lighthouse keeper waiting for ships that might never return. Helen. Grace protested weakly. Don't Helen me. I've known you since you were 16 years old, checking out every book on philosophy and literature we had. I watched you grow into a remarkable woman, and I watched you turn away every decent man in 3 counties, because none of them measured up to a memory. Ah! The question is, young man, do you measure up to the memory? Or are you just nostalgia wrapped in an expensive suit? Daniel met her gaze steadily. I don't know if I measure up to anything, but I know that Grace makes me want to be better than I've been. She makes me question everything I thought mattered and realize I've been measuring success by the wrong standards. Helen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good answer. Grace, stop being afraid. Life is short, and love is rare. I spent 40 years married to a good man, and I'd trade every comfortable day of it for 1 year of the kind of passion I see in your eyes when you look at this boy. The doctor emerged before Grace could respond. Patricia's hip was bruised but not broken. She would be fine, but needed more supervised care than Daniel had realized. The incident forced a reckoning Daniel had been avoiding. His mother needed him, at least for a while longer. Later that night in Grace's cottage, they faced the complicated reality of their situation. Daniel sat on her couch, exhausted and conflicted. Grace made tea, moving through her small kitchen with practiced efficiency. I can't leave her, Daniel said quietly. Not yet. She needs me. I know. Grace handed him a mug and sat beside him. And I wouldn't ask you to. Patricia is your mother. She comes first. That means I can't return to Seattle. I'll need to work remotely, maybe for months. Which means I'm asking you to wait again, to put your life on hold, Daniel. Grace set down her tea and took his face in her hands. I've been waiting 20 years. A few more months to make sure your mother recovers isn't sacrifice. It's human decency and love. Besides, it gives us time. Time to know each other without pressure, without rushing into decisions that will alter both our lives. He pulled her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. How did you get to be so wise? 20 years of reading every philosophy and self-help book in the library. She leaned back to look at him. But Daniel, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about what you said in Foster's Field. About Seattle. About expanding my life. And you're right. I've made Maplewood my entire world because it felt safe. But safety isn't the same as living. What are you saying? I'm saying that when your mother is recovered, when the time is right, I want to see your world. I want to understand the life you've built. And maybe, if we're both very lucky and very brave, we can figure out how to merge our worlds into something new. They talked late into the night, making plans that were equal parts practical and dreamlike. Daniel would stay in Maplewood for his mother's recovery. He would continue working remotely. Maybe even exploring the idea of opening a satellite office somewhere with better quality of life than Silicon Valley. Grace would take a sabbatical from the library, something she had never done, and they would travel together. Seattle first, then wherever they wanted to go. But underlying all the planning was the unspoken question. What about intimacy? What about the physical aspect of their relationship that Grace had protected so carefully for so long? Finally, Grace addressed it directly. I know you're being patient, not pushing for more than I'm ready to give. And I appreciate that more than I can say. Grace, there's no timeline. I mean that. I know you do. But Daniel, I want you to understand something. My choices weren't entirely about high ideals or romantic principles. They were also about fear. About not feeling safe enough to be vulnerable. She took his hand. With you, I'm starting to feel that safety. The walls I built are still there, but they're cracking. I can't promise when I'll be ready, but I can promise that I want to be. That you make me want to be brave. Daniel kissed her forehead gently. Then we'll take it moment by moment. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people learning how to trust each other. The weeks that followed were a study in patience and growing intimacy. Daniel worked from his mother's house, taking breaks to help with her care. Grace visited in the evenings, bringing books and conversation. Patricia, recovering well, watched them with knowing eyes and gentle encouragement. Slowly, carefully, they grew closer. A held hand became an arm around shoulders. A kiss on the forehead became a real kiss, tender and full of restrained passion. Grace set the pace, and Daniel followed, showing her through actions that she was in control, that her boundaries mattered more than his desires. One evening in late November, with Patricia asleep and early snow falling outside, Grace and Daniel sat by the fireplace in his mother's living room. Grace had been quiet all evening, thoughtful. Finally, she turned to him. "I've decided something. I'm going to tell the library board that I want a 6-month sabbatical starting in January. They'll approve it. I've worked there for 15 years without taking more than a few days off at a time. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm not pressured. I'm ready. Ready to see the world beyond Maplewood. Ready to take risks. Ready to discover who I can be when I'm not playing it safe."
Ow.
She smiled, and it was radiant. "You gave me back something I'd almost forgotten. The courage to dream bigger than my comfort zone." Daniel pulled her close. "You gave me something too. A reason to slow down, to appreciate what matters. To understand that success isn't about what you build, but about who you become and who you love." Ow. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, both understanding that they were at the beginning of something profound. The road ahead would have challenges. They would need to navigate the practical realities of merging to very different lives. There would be moments of doubt, of fear, of struggling to blend his fast-paced world with her quieter values. But they had time now. Time to build trust, time to heal old wounds, time to create something new from the foundation of who they had been and who they had become. Outside, snow continued to fall on Maplewood, covering the familiar streets in white. Inside, two people who had spent 20 years learning who they were began the harder, more beautiful work of learning who they could be together. Not rushed, not pressured, but moving forward with the kind of intentional courage that defines real love. Grace rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding not a memory or an ideal, but a real, complicated, extraordinary woman who had taught him that the best things in life are worth waiting for. And as the fire crackled and the snow fell, they both knew that this, finally, was the beginning of the life they had each been searching for in their different ways all along. The promise they had made as teenagers in Foster's Field had been kept. Not in the way they expected, but in the way that mattered most. They had refused to settle, fought to become their best selves, and found their way back to each other when they were finally ready to appreciate what they had found. And that, they both understood, was worth everything. The Seattle rain fell in a gentle mist as Grace stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel's downtown apartment, watching the city lights blur and shimmer. Behind her, she could hear him on a conference call, his voice confident and measured as he discussed quarterly projections with his team. 6 months ago, that voice would have intimidated her. Now it was simply Daniel, the man who sang off-key in the shower and made terrible coffee but perfect scrambled eggs. Her sabbatical had been everything she hoped and nothing she expected. They had spent January in Maplewood. Quiet days while Patricia continued her recovery and Grace prepared the library for her absence. February brought their first real trip together, 2 weeks in Portugal, where they wandered through Lisbon's narrow streets, and Daniel watched Grace fall in love with a city full of books and beauty. March was Seattle, where she met Thomas and discovered that Daniel's business world, while foreign, wasn't as intimidating as she had imagined. And somewhere between Lisbon and Seattle, between quiet conversations and shared adventures, Grace had let the last of her walls crumble. It had happened naturally, without fanfare or grand gesture. They had been in his apartment, much like tonight, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel had kissed her as he had dozens of times before, but something shifted. Grace had pulled him closer instead of pulling away, and when he looked at her with questions in his eyes, she had simply nodded. "Are you sure?" He had whispered, always careful, always giving her space to choose. "I'm sure," she had answered. "I trust you. I love you." That night had been tender and imperfect and beautiful. Daniel had been patient, following her lead, showing her that intimacy could be safe and sacred. And Grace had discovered that waiting hadn't been wasted time. It had taught her to recognize what real love looked like, felt like, demanded now. 3 months later, she stood in his apartment, feeling completely at peace with her choice. She wore his MIT sweatshirt, her hair still damp from their shared shower, a book of poetry tucked under her arm. This was intimacy too, she had learned. Not just physical closeness, but the comfort of existing in each other's space without performance or pretense. Daniel finished his call and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Sorry about that. Thompson always calls at the worst times. It's fine. I was reading. She leaned back against him. Your mother called while you were on the phone? She wants to know if we're coming for Thanksgiving. That we'd talk about it. Grace turned in his arms. Daniel, we need to make a decision. About us, about where we go from here. My sabbatical ends in 2 months. He'd been expecting this conversation. They both had. For 6 months, they had lived in a beautiful suspension, traveling between his world and hers, but never truly committing to either. It couldn't last forever. What do you want, Grace? Really want? She had thought about this question for weeks, lying awake in hotel rooms in his apartment and her cottage in Maplewood. I want both. I want the library, and I want you. I want Maplewood, and I want adventure. I want my roots, and I want wings. Those things sound contradictory. They don't have to be. She pulled away and walked to the dining table where her laptop sat open. Come here. I want to show you something. Daniel followed, and Grace pulled up a document she'd been working on for weeks. It was a proposal detailed and researched, outlining a plan for a regional library network that would connect small-town libraries across New England. Sharing resources and digital infrastructure, the hub would be based in Maplewood, but the reach would be vast. I've been talking to the State Library Association, Grace explained, her excitement building. There's funding available for rural development. With the right technology and coordination, we could bring world-class library services to dozens of small towns. It would require travel, meetings in Boston and Portland, but I could base myself in Maplewood. Daniel read through the proposal, his expression growing more animated. This is brilliant, Grace. The scale, the impact. Do you know how many people this could serve? About 200,000 across 15 rural counties. And Daniel, here's where you come in. She opened another file. Your company specializes in connection software, in building platforms that link people and resources. What if we partnered? You provide the technology infrastructure, I provide the library expertise. We could create something that changes how rural communities access information and education. Daniel stared at her, then at the screen, then back at her. You've thought this through. I've done more than think. I've made preliminary calls, drafted budgets, talked to board members. This could work, Daniel. I could expand my world without abandoning what I love, and you could build something that matters in a different way than corporate profits. Something with legacy. Pulled her into his arms, laughing. You're incredible. Do you know that? You're absolutely incredible. Is that a yes? That's a let's talk to Thomas tomorrow and my mother's lawyer about setting up a nonprofit division. And yes, Grace. Yes to all of it. Kissed her deeply. But I have a condition. What condition? Daniel walked to his bedroom and returned with a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught as he knelt in front of her, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the light. Grace Holloway, will you marry me? Not because we're trying to recapture the past, or because it's expected, but because I've spent 6 months learning who you really are, and I want to spend the rest of my life continuing that discovery. I want to build this library network with you. I want to split our time between Maplewood and Seattle. I want to fight about whose turn it is to do dishes and make love in the middle of the afternoon and grow old arguing about books. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Grace's face. You're supposed to wait for me to answer before you start planning our whole life. Is that a yes? Yes, Daniel. Yes to everything. He slipped the ring on her finger and she pulled him up, kissing him with all the passion and joy and relief she felt. They had found their way through fear and time and distance to this moment. This choice, this beginning.